to have some kind of final follow-up thoughts on some of those last points. When we left off, we were discussing environmental policy, and specifically, I think the last comment that I heard that you made was, it's amazing how many scientists there are in Congress who don't have science degrees.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, and so you find that people are trying to make public policy under the auspices of their scientific understanding, and we actually need to be leaning on the scientists who understand the research and the data, and
yeah,
stop listening to whether somebody's going to make profit on something or not.
exactly. And the one thing that's like really always struck me that I think is a failing in the kind of the average American's understanding of the political process is that there's like this almost kind of thought that there's meritocracy, or that the people who get elected are these above average men and women. And like, having been around so many elected officials around the country for so long, I can tell you that is not true. Like, a lot of times it's just like the right mix of ego, and no one better stepped up for that position. People fail upwards in politics all the time. And the reality is that, yeah, that crazy person on your Facebook timeline you went to high school with, like, sharing articles from like Natural News talking about how like the flu vaccine will give you cancer, that dude could go to Congress if he just believed it. Like,
Yeah.
and no one,
Yeah.
yeah, and that happens all the time, unfortunately.
Well, and in a district like mine, the incumbent here was a lobbyist before he was a congressperson, and he literally got selected to do this job and got propped up to do this job because of his corporate lobbying ties. And they said, okay, this is a guy who's in the tank for us. We'll throw a lot of our money this way, and we'll elevate him. And then there's never been in 20 years. He took office in 2001, the same year that G.W. Bush did. And there's never been an effective challenge from the left, because, Democrats are so happy to just have somebody with a D behind their name, regardless of what they stand for, which is what I run up against a lot. Is, why would you challenge somebody as a Democrat who's already in office as a Democrat? And the answer is, well, he's not doing the things that I want. Of course, I'm going to challenge that. I've wanted to have this guy removed for 15 years. But because nobody has been stepping up to do it, again, it just kind of fell to me with people saying, "Hey, you're the guy to do it. You're the guy to do it."
Well, and that is that. I mean, that is exactly it. Is that these people will go unchallenged, regardless of the type of job they're doing, and until someone like you steps in and says, "Hey, why not me?"
Yeah. Yeah, and Larson verifiably has one of the worst records in Congress. Again, it's nice that you can have somebody to run against who's got 18, 20 years under their belt in Congress, because I can verifiably show that he's in the bottom 20% of, getting bills passed, getting bills co-sponsored. I think he's maybe gotten 6 pieces of legislation that he has been primary sponsor of passed in 20 years. I mean, his record as an effective congressperson is verifiably abysmal. But then, if I say something like that, of course, I'm attacking a Democrat. I'm like, don't you want somebody who does better for the district? And for the corporate centrists, sometimes the answer to that is no.
Yeah, I mean, it's often no. It is. I think there is this kind of dichotomy amongst the electorate sometimes that there is these hyper partisan Democrats who, and they're not necessarily locked to ideology. Some of them can be fairly progressive. Some of them can be center right, much less centrist, and everything in between. But for them, like you said, it's about having the little D next to their name, and they tend to view politics in this very us versus them, 2 teams out on the field, sports metaphor kind of lens. Yeah, and it's not. It's important that I think we have people out there reminding people that that's not what it's about. It's about ideas, and it's about building small teams and small coalitions to advance things for the betterment of people.
Well, and it's also about recognizing, and I don't think that this is something that many Democrats, corporate centrist Democrats tend to be, middle class, upper middle class. They've got good jobs. They've got good health insurance. They are not struggling day to day like all of the people. You think about why 46% of the population might not have voted in 2016, and those are people who are there struggling day to day. And they need better wages, and they need to have health care, and they are living on a precipice, and they don't have time for politics, and they don't think that the political system works for them anyway. What are we doing to reach out to those people? And the answer is that in terms of Democratic Party strategy, there is no outreach to those people. They are not considered people who, the Democratic Party runs through this list of their voters of, all right, who are the people who vote, often? Who are the people who sometimes vote? Okay, well, we want to reach out to the people who sometimes vote. The people who never vote, the people who might not be considered stalwart Democrats, those people are, quite frankly, ignored by the system. And when you get around to the actual voting that happens, you see that, that's the truth. We have these abysmal turnouts because the Democratic Party, which based on its platform could be making great outreach to these people, simply doesn't want to spend the time to do it. And I think that really comes down to who is in control of the Democratic Party. That is, that the corporate donors who donate to the Republican Party are also donating to the Democratic Party. And it's that idea of this consultant class gravy train continuing, rather than having people who are actually going to pass policy that will upset the corporate donors but will work for the public. The general public is not viewed as a valuable commodity.
Well, I might push back a little on this, just because I build those lists. It's what I've done for years now, and the truth is, I do it for progressive campaigns, and I still often go after the people who, super voters, we call them. You vote 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4, right? The jargon. And it has nothing to do, at least from where I'm coming from, when I'm building universes for different things, and they're different for different things,
right.
Obviously, but each election requires something different.
I understand. I totally understand what you're saying.
But it's resources.
Exactly. That's the thing. The progressive campaigns.
It's the lack of resources.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so you have to use your resources as best you can. But and I suppose the Democratic Party is the same, but as a big party structure, they are losing a lot of their potential voting base because they choose not to prioritize that outreach. And they could.
Well, yeah, and I think, and you and I both serve. You guys call it a central committee there. We call it an executive committee here. So you and I have both been in these positions, and I think we've seen firsthand these decisions, how they get made at a local level, much less up at bigger levels, and how those interact. But when there is outreach, the one thing that always struck me is it gets entirely based so much on like demographics versus, say, voting history or anything else that might. And the messaging can often, to different demographics, can be so tone deaf and monolithic and like borderline prejudice without like realizing it. Because it's always like it's some room of like middle class white people saying like, well, we need to go into this neighborhood that's predominantly not white and let them know how racist Republicans are. Well, like people fucking know how racist Republicans are. At some point, they stop caring if you're not doing anything better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that is the message to Democrats in this presidential cycle. And what I'm not at all happy, of course, with Joe Biden as a candidate. But my biggest concern is, what appeal does Joe Biden have to all the people who didn't vote, to all the people who are new voters, the young people who are new voters? What is the appeal that Joe Biden has that puts it in the bag for you to beat Donald Trump? And the answer is, there's nothing there. That's Joe Biden is the most, he's got one of the most conservative voting records for his time in Congress. He's verifiably lied about so many things, about his record, about events, about his history. He had to drop out of the presidential primary in 1988 because of plagiarism.
Plagiarism.
And so what is a candidate like Joe Biden? Where is the appeal for, the vast majority of the population that's under 45 or 50? I don't see it. And so I look at the Democrats as cutting their own throats on this one. They so badly wanted to push Bernie out of the race because Bernie would actually force them to change as a party. And that just really tells you who's in control of the two-party system.
Well, it's this fear of the McGovern loss and the Carter losses and these things, right? Like, I think the reality is, and this goes back to like the partisan nature, I think, of a lot of Democratic structures. I've talked to so many like centrist Democrats in different positions who like frankly don't really give a shit if what the policies are. They don't care if it's
Right.
Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, as long as it's one of them and they win. For them, it's this thought of he can't win. Bernie Sanders can't win, and he can't win over these places, these middle America places. And, the reality is we don't know if that is or is not true. We wouldn't know unless we put him up in a general. Because there's so many things.
Exactly.
There's everything from personality to ideas, yada, yada, yada. And we don't know that about Joe Biden necessarily either. Like, I said something on Twitter that I took a lot of shit for that was like, and this was before Bernie dropped out, but it was like, I just don't know like what we're going to run on if Biden's the candidate. But there were also like a lot of responses that like checked me on my biases about it. It's like, yeah, there's things in his platform, there's things in his record that don't suck and that would be fairly transformational for society. Maybe that can be ran on. I don't know. But we have no idea. We don't know if it's going to be the thing that they focus on either, because so far it hasn't been. So far it's Joe Biden has been running on Barack Obama is the problem.
Right. Well, I think anybody on the left who supports Medicare for all knows that strengthening the ACA is not the answer. Regardless of what you might do, you're still going to have millions of people who don't have access to any health care at all. And of course, that hurts the working class and it hurts, minority communities and women more than it hurts, your average middle class white guy. I think we've got to do better than, or we've got to do substantially better than, we can't have Trump in the White House anymore. I mean, that's, it is the lowest bar that you could possibly have, that, Joe Biden is better than Trump. I mean, that's a low bar. And I don't know why we as a Democratic Party are always shooting for just that low bar. Let's just make sure we can get anybody in there because anybody is better than Trump. And I don't think anybody is better than Trump really resonates with a whole lot of people. It resonates with your stalwart Democrats. Yeah. I don't know that it resonates with a whole lot of the rest of the electorate.
I see. That's been my thoughts on it for a while now, frankly, and I think that this is an issue that often happens where the person who wins a Democratic primary is maybe not the best suited to win a general election. I don't think that most Democrats and most Democratic voters necessarily understand that or get that. And I think the ideas that they have on electability can be kind of just off, for lack of any better term. I tend to think, like, for example, and going back to the point, I tend to think that anybody who ran in our primary probably would be better than Donald Trump. Heavy caveat, probably not Mike Bloomberg. That one really threw me for a loop. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do on that. I really didn't know what the hell I was going to do on that one.
Oh, but and it's stunning to me how the DNC was willing to change rules to make sure he got in debates, and just the thought, just the theoretical idea that you would take the eighth or ninth richest person in the world, I don't know where he stands on that scale, but he's way up there, and put them in charge of the most powerful military, the largest economy. Where is the logic there? Because for me, just in political theory, that's like go straight to fascism, do not pass go. That's I struggled with that one hugely.
Well, and like, let's just be honest, he was a shitty mayor.
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Let's call a spade on that one, and just like say what it is. Like I will accept the idea that maybe a rich person won't necessarily by default do what's best for rich people. I can be sold that line. I think it's a dicey line, but I think it's possible. But I also can't go back and not see him at the fucking RNC in 04, or see him just be a bad mayor for New York City. Like, his one turn in political office ain't great.
No, and the fact with somebody with as much money as he had, he was instrumental in the stop and frisk, and then managed to get the rules changed in New York to get himself a third term that he was supposed to be term limited out of. We worship money in this country, and it's not working out well for us. One of the points that I really wanted to make about what the dangers of a subpar Democratic presidency are. Now, let's assume Biden wins. Can we go back to Bill Clinton? Can we go back to 8 years of Obama and recognize how after Clinton, we ended up with Bush? After Obama, we ended up with Trump. What is it about those terms? Because you would think that on policy, if a Democratic president won, that they would get the stuff done for the people, because that's who they're supposed to represent. Republicans openly are corporate shills, and I don't think anybody would deny that, even on the Republican side. But what is it about 8 years of Obama that caused Trump? Because I do think the inaction of the Obama administration on closing the income inequality grew under Obama. We dropped more bombs on brown people around the world under Obama. We couldn't get healthcare effectively fixed under Obama. I've been on the ACA here in Washington State. It's awful. It's unaffordable. You don't get you can't get the treatment you need without breaking your bank. Those are the things that, and manufacturing. Why did we end up losing Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan, states that a Democrat should have won? And the Democratic Party does not seem to have that sense of introspection into really analyzing why that happened, and then putting the blame on the fact that Obama ran on hope and change, and almost his entire 8 years was reinforcing the power of the oligarchy. I don't think that they want to take that into consideration. So my concern with Biden winning is, all right, you thought things couldn't get worse than Bush, you got Trump. Who's going to be worse than Trump? Because I guarantee that person is out there waiting to take office.
Yeah, there really is. And there's an article that a friend shared with me a while back that was from like a fairly, and I forget where it was, but it was like from a fairly like mainstream publication too, like something that is not typically known for like a radical thought or idea. And it basically pointed out, like, thank God it was Trump, because like the country was so primed for that level of, authoritarianism. And also, like vulgarity and racism and everything else that's kind of balled together with that. But it was, thank God it was someone that was so incompetent about it.
Yes.
Because it could have been someone more dangerous. This man is dangerous enough. This man is dangerous enough, and his incompetence is a different danger on its own right, as we're seeing now, but it could have been someone so much more dangerous. It could have been someone so much more polished. And And I used to joke about that back during 2016. I would say that, look, like Donald Trump scares the hell out of me, but maybe not as much as Ted Cruz, honestly.
Well, and I honestly say maybe not as much as somebody who has as much wealth as Bloomberg does. I once the person with that much personal wealth gets into an office of that much institutional power, I mean, all bets are off. I don't know what he's going to do. I certainly don't trust his record. So how is it that I could say that Bloomberg, who has a history of racism, I mean, it's a little bit more subdued than Trump's racism, and Trump is just crass and out there and doesn't care, and his base eats it up. But what if you have somebody who's more subtle and more intelligent and has really far more connections globally and institutionally than Trump has, and that's Mike Bloomberg right there. So the thought that things can't get worse than Trump, I don't know. I mean, I have a feeling that they could get substantially worse.
I do too, and I think we've got to do something hard to pivot away from that. And I mean, of course, part of this does come down to the level and the way that political discourse has evolved in this country. I had someone on an episode maybe a day or two ago. We were talking about, the difference is almost that we now have, if you went back, for example, say the 1950s, we had two parties that often agreed, at least on certain large issues, on what a broad end goal might be. And there was just a kind of a difference of opinion of how to achieve it. Everyone was in agreement that education should be better, but there was a disagreement on what the best way to do it was. Public education specifically, everyone was in an agreement about certain things. And the disagreements that happened legislatively were simply on the path to get there. We now see that conversation, I think, entirely happening in the Democratic Party. And then we're having we're having a conversation with people where there's no agreement on an end goal at all once we actually get to the point of legislating.
Yeah, that all changed. That was Reagan. Reagan's election did something to this country. And the entirety of how politics was marketed changed. With Reagan, we saw just the outright assault on unions. And we saw a lot of political doublespeak where, the communication to the public was one thing, but it was diametrically opposed to what the party was actually doing. And throughout that, I think since Reagan, you've had rather than the Democrats stepping out and really opposing Reaganism and Reaganomics, you've had them move towards Reaganism and Reaganomics, thinking that they are going to better compete by becoming Republican light, rather than just outright rejecting Reaganism, which is what I think they should have done right from the start.
Well, I think there was a path, right? Like, there was a moment where I will agree, and that moment being Bill Clinton, where that path made sense and it worked. There was the right stew of things going on where, like, frankly, the Democrats tried to reject Reaganism twice in the 80s, and they got their asses kicked on it. They did. And the country wanted. The country was fucking hungry for this kind of right-wing policy, and more than that, I think also like the salesman himself who was giving it to them. And we, in Bill Clinton, we did find, I think, a soft enough way of saying that there might be a slight alternative without telling people that they didn't actually want that, and an equally good salesman. There was that one moment where I think the importance of Bill Clinton, maybe the Clintons as a unit, is saving the Democratic Party in the 90s and making them electable again, so that there could be a conversation to help shift that window back to the left. That moment was 30 years ago. It was 30 years ago. It was one election cycle, two presidential terms, 8 years. That's all we really needed of that type of policy to reorient America. And we saw that. Look, you want to know, in my opinion, the truth of the criticisms that we have as the left of Barack Obama. I think they have much left to do with Barack Obama, where his thoughts or his head was at, and more to do with how many Democrats in both houses of Congress openly fought against him the first couple of years he was there. Let's be honest. By 3 years in, that man just seemed tired.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was the first 2 years where the real work could have and should have been done. And because it wasn't done in those first 2 years, that's why the Democrats got their asses handed to them in 2010. Yeah. And then they were in a position where they couldn't get anything done. And then you have people like Mitch McConnell essentially say that my only goal is to stop Barack Obama from getting reelected. That was the only purpose. I mean, listen, I don't want anybody to think that I don't understand that the Republican Party is heinous. They are absolutely heinous in word and in deed. I think we are at a point now, and we've been at a point for some time where the pushback against that has to be far more aggressive, and I don't think you can get that effective, aggressive pushback while you are a corporate-owned party, at which the Democratic Party is.
Yeah. Well, going back to the Barack Obama's 2 years, because here's the thing, and I think this is what's so important to me about this specifically. When I see people like you doing these types of primary challenges, what I see is people trying to fight and right wrongs that we needed righted back in 2008. Because the reality is, the White House can only do so much work. They can only attempt to whip so many votes. They can only try to, leverage to whatever their capabilities are. The reality is, we did have a president at that time. There might still have been disagreements that I or you or other people had with him, but we did have a president that was pushing for a public option, that was pushing for, regards to healthcare. That was the original promise of the ACA, was pushing for card check and strengthening of labor unions, that was pushing to shut down Guantanamo. These were real things that they were trying to do in that administration those first 2 years. And it was not just Republicans who stopped them.
Yep.
It was Democrats. It was also Democrats. And, when you get Barack Obama phase 2, if you want to say that, the far more measured and centrist one, it's a man who tried to wage those fights. So, I think if you look at it from a narrative perspective, it's a man who tried to wage those fights damn near on his own. I mean, it was basically him, and I give Joe Biden credit for this. He towed Obama's line, and it seemed like even if it was something he might have had a policy disagreement with, he went to bat for him. It was basically those two alone, and then whatever random coalition of people they could put together in the House.
Yeah, I don't think the Progressive Caucus even existed at that point. This idea of progressivism, the way it's defined today, was an absolute non-factor at that point. You're right.
It existed, but it wasn't much of a factor, And yeah, I mean, it's and we would have the same issue. Let's say this, right? We would have the same issue if we put Sanders in right now. We would have those same fights. We're going to have that all damn near no matter who we put up right now. We've got to focus on getting not just any Democrat, but better Democrats into these seats. Better
Democrats. Hey, look right behind me. It says "Demand Better." That's my tagline. Demand better. It's it's kind of nondescript because of course you want to demand better, but really that's what we were talking about. Can we have a better class of Democrat? And the guy I'm running against, when you look at voting records back in that the first half of Obama's first term, you will find that the guy I'm running against was one of those Obama resistors. Why couldn't we not get all the Democrats on board with healthcare reform? Why did we have Democrats as soon as we got after the TARP bailout and we had Dodd-Frank, which was weak to begin with? But why did we have some Democrats immediately start to unravel that? And he was one of them. So, it's a fair assessment on Obama. And I personally give Obama a lot of crap for not continuing the fight. But yeah, that man aged in 8 years, probably. We saw it happen right in front of our eyes. It looked like he aged about 30 years. So,
Yeah,
I
yeah, he did.
I will accept that assessment of Obama in terms of what he wanted to come into office to accomplish and what essentially he was able to get done and not get done. But it was unless you have a Congress that is going to be a friendly Congress, and that's one of the things that I thought was going to be fantastically inspiring about a Sanders presidency, because all the people who are running across the country to challenge those corporate Democrats, I think that they would have gotten a huge boost for their races if Sanders had gotten the nomination. And it makes the fight for us, continue to be significantly uphill.
Well, I've kept you between the two segments. I've kept you for an hour now, and I got to say this was a lot of fun. I really went off script in this second half, and I think we more just were just having a conversation than me asking you questions.
Absolutely,
so,
yeah, I love it. I love it.
I would like to ask you one actual question to wrap things
it.
up, and then we probably should bring it to a close. But I've been asking this of everyone for the last maybe month who comes on here, and which is, through everything that you have done, through your personal life, through your career, what is the thing that you most hope to convey to other people?
We're all in this together. I think America has a tendency to focus on what individuals could and should do for themselves and their own. And I was actually raised that way. I was raised in a Reagan Republican household by a military officer father. And so, I don't. I was taught to fend for myself and be responsible to myself, and there is value to that. But there is also, for the people who, my father's almost 80 years old. He lives in Florida, and he's a libertarian more than he is a Republican. But he voted for Trump. And his perspective on the world, and I think this is a lot of older generations, is I earned what I have. Don't take what I have and don't tell me what to do, because I earned what I have. And this is a guy who has had a government paycheck his entire life, So for me, there's a what's it called? There's a disconnect there. And I think everybody needs to realize that if you are in a position of success, you got there because other people helped you, because you were lucky enough to be who you were in whatever situation you were. And I want people to understand that we are all in some way dependent upon each other. So when Bernie brought out that message of, I am willing to fight for someone I don't know, I feel like that's where I am. And I want other people. That was such a powerful message, not just the not me, us, but the I am willing to fight for somebody I don't know. I could sit back. I could probably enjoy, I don't have a great job. I'll be honest. But I could probably find a way to get back into education if I wanted to be a teacher, and I could live a relatively comfortable life. But I can't do that knowing that half of this country is struggling paycheck to paycheck. That does not sit well with me. And so I have what I have because I have been privileged in many ways. I think getting people to understand how they've been privileged, how they've been supported, how important social services are to help people who aren't as fortunate enough as you might be. I think that's really the key to. It's where I want this country to be, and we are not the Wild West. rugged individualism, only works if you already have the resources. And so I would like to change our national culture on just the understanding of the connectivity of humanity. And what Martin Luther King said, an injustice to one is an injustice to all. It's really a very union mentality, like a labor union mentality, which is why it's so disappointing that the labor movement in this country has been so diminished. But that's really what I want to bring to the table. I think we're all in some way responsible for each other.
All right. That was Jason Call, Democrat for Congress in Washington's 2nd District. Again, Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show, and have a great holiday if you're celebrating it.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate it very much.